Phoenix police say Bolles took a telephone call in the lobby of the Hotel Clarendon, and when he had completed it, returned to his car.
She showed up and told me that a man had been blown up in his car and they're blaming her dad for doing it.
Critically injured, Bolles gasped 4 words to bystanders: Mafia, Emprise, and John Adamson.
The more this story has gone on, I've realized how riddled the Mafia was in Arizona.
This is True Crime Arizona, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.
It's one of Arizona's most infamous murders, riddled in theories, controversy, and speculation. And it's probably the case people ask me to do on the podcast more than any other case. June 13th, 1976.
Don Bolles is a 47-year-old investigative reporter for the Arizona Republic. He's been working on a series about the Mafia. Today, as he attempted to start his car, a bomb went off.
Ran over there and the man was laying outside his car. I saw that his legs were torn and I went over and took my belt off and applied a tourniquet.
It was a shocking scene outside the Hotel Clarendon in downtown Phoenix. Paramedics rushed to the scene.
It literally shook our fire station. Every window in it, I'm surprised that the glass didn't shatter. It was such a loud and powerful explosion.
Don Bolles was on the ground, barely moving. Before losing consciousness, Bolles said something.
Police say Bolles reportedly told a blonde-haired woman who came to his aid, so-and-so did it, but just who that is wasn't released by police.
Until it was.
Critically injured, Bolles gasped 4 words to bystanders: Mafia, Emprise, the name of a New York sports concessionaire which once owned a piece of 6 dog racing tracks here, and John Adamson, the man Bolles later identified from a hospital bed as his informant.
Emprise, John Adamson, Mafia. Don Bolles died 11 days later, but those words would change the scope of the case forever.
I remember him very well. I get a lot of flashbacks.
That's Diane Bolles, Don Bolles' daughter. She said, "I remember him well. I get a lot of flashbacks." Diane was just 6 years old in 1976 and born hearing impaired. Her husband David sat with her during our interview in case she needed help understanding what I said. But Diane is sharp and certainly hasn't let a lack of hearing stop her. It was something her father was passionate about too. Don Bolles is most well known for writing about organized crime in Arizona, but in 1973, he testified in front of the legislature to get a bill passed that required public schools to offer special education inspired by his daughter to make sure she and other kids hard of hearing or deaf had access to proper education. Diane sent me an article her father wrote about it all, called Report of Deafness, Jolt to Parents.
Oh, she was a great dad. She was the best. We used to come home and we read to him. We were so happy to see him.
She said, "Oh, he was a great dad. He was the best. He used to come home and we would run to him. We were so happy to see him." A small moment like that cemented in Diane's memory of a father who was taken far too soon from her. She remembers that day. She was at school.
They told her she was in a car accident. We were thinking, like an automobile accident. But it was bad.
She said it was hard. They told us he was in a car accident, like an automobile accident, but it was bad. Of course, as she grew up and as the case gained national attention, she'd learn it was far worse and much more calculated than an accident. So why was Don Bolles at the Hotel Clarendon that day in the first place? Turns out somebody had set up a meeting between Don Bolles and a source for a potential story involving land fraud. Don Bolles was the best there was when it came to reporting on corruption, so he took the meeting, but left a note on his desk for his supervisor of who set up the meeting, John Adamson. When Bolles got to the Hotel Clarendon, Adamson called and said the source backed out.
Phoenix police say Bolles took a telephone call in the lobby of the Hotel Clarendon, and when he had completed it, returned to his car.
That's when the bomb went off. Everyone started putting the pieces together of what Don Bolles' dying words may have meant. Emprise was the partner of the Funk family, who ran a dog racing track in Phoenix. Bolles had reported on the company's suspected ties to the mob. John Adamson was arrested for the murder after arranging the fake meeting. He then told authorities the mastermind behind the crime was Phoenix contractor Max Dunlap, saying Dunlap coordinated the hit at the request of his friend Kemper Marley, who resigned from the Arizona Racing Commission after Bolles wrote a series of articles about him. Karen Dunlap Graham was just 16 years old at the time. She was coming back from a trip in Colorado working with horses and stopped in Flagstaff. That's when she got a bizarre call from her sister.
I need to come see you. And I'm like, what? You know? And then she showed up and told me that a man had been blown up in his car and they're blaming our dad for the murder or for doing it. And I mean, what? Like, what?
Karen loved her dad. She was one of 7 kids. They lived off Bethany Home Road in Phoenix. She says they were the total family unit. Anytime one would go somewhere, the whole family would go together. Karen hadn't ever talked on television until our interview with her in April 2023. She recently decided to share her story on a new podcast called The Patsy, after finally getting the courage to read letters her dad wrote from prison about his life and left for her. She believes her dad was wrongly convicted for the murder of Don Bolles twice.
Never did I think for 1 minute he would ever go to jail and then die in prison over something that he had nothing to do with. It was insane. I had no idea what we were in for.
Karen said her dad went to school with a bunch of people involved in this investigation.
What was the evidence they had on your dad that led to that first conviction?
Really, I think the main thing was they said that my dad dropped off the money to Adamson's attorney. He delivered the money to him.
According to authorities, Max Dunlap delivered thousands of dollars to Neil Roberts, a Phoenix attorney who was said to be John Adamson's attorney. That money was for the Don Bolles hit. Karen claims a stranger dropped the money off at their house and that her dad didn't know what it was for.
There was a man that dropped the money, that brought the money to my dad and said it was from Neil Roberts. He was being watched and he needed to get this money to John Adamson's attorney, and would he do it? And I mean, my dad, over and over again, he's like, I go, Dad, why did you do that? And he's like, you know, I didn't want to. The guy gave him the money and left. It's not like he gave him a choice. He handed him a bag of money. He goes, you know, I figured, I didn't know what to do. He goes, but I figured I've never done anything wrong. He didn't know he was being set up. So he's like, okay, so he did exactly what they told him to do. And he walked up there thinking he was just delivering it. When he walked in, John Adamson was there. And that's when he said his stomach went upside down sick because he was like, what's going on?
The Attorney General's office, who ended up prosecuting the case, did not buy that. They argued Dunlap knew what he was doing. But what about Kemper Marley? Adamson told detectives Dunlap carried out this request for Marley, who everyone believed had a motive to kill Bolles because of the articles Bolles wrote about him that cost him the Racing Commission position.
My dad thought the world of Kemper.
Did you believe that Kemper had asked your dad for anything involved in this? Or did you think that was something that was fabricated?
No, that's the thing that's so crazy. Kemper was not that kind of guy. I'm just telling you, they started to make a story up of how they cost him the Racing Commission. I can promise you, I remember being a kid and asking my dad, and my dad said Kemper didn't even want the position. They appointed him that. You know, he didn't run for it. He was appointed it, and he didn't even want it. If he had a problem with Don Bolles, he would have gone, drove his truck down to his office, walked in and probably punched him in the face or hit him. You know what I mean? That was the kind of guy he was. He didn't kill. He's just not that kind. It was ridiculous, ridiculous.
Kemper Marley was never charged for any crimes in the Don Bolles murder case and denied any involvement. Adamson pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and implicated Dunlap and another man for the murder, Chandler plumber James Robeson, in return for a 20-year prison sentence. Adamson said Robeson physically put the bomb under Bolles' car that day and pressed the button for it to go off. Adamson was at a local bar when the explosion happened. John Adamson, Max Dunlap, and James Robeson were all convicted of murder in 1977. Dunlap and Robeson were sentenced to death. At first. Then, things unraveled. Dunlap and Robeson's convictions were overturned in 1980, and it was unclear if the state could get Adamson to testify against them at new trials. The Arizona Supreme Court overturned the convictions, saying the court improperly denied a defense motion to strike Adamson's testimony because Adamson was allowed to assert his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination and refused to answer certain questions posed to him on cross-examination. As soon as Dunlap was out of prison, he sued the City of Phoenix Police Department and the state of Arizona, claiming they purposefully got rid of case files that would have shown he was innocent. Karen Graham has much of the testimony from those civil trials in storage. She dug it all out and sent me dozens of pages. I wanted to go through it and see what was said and preserved in writing. The court documents showed multiple Phoenix police officers testified they were told to get rid of pages in the 851 Emprise file with any information that pertained to John Adamson, Emprise, the Funk organizations, and the Don Bolles investigation.
They didn't do anything wrong, they were just doing what they were told. Right. And they knew it, and they testified to it.
I asked Phoenix police about this now. Was this normal protocol to get rid of files like this? The Public Information Office told me they'd get me a statement about it before my deadline for the newscast that night. I never got a statement before my story aired or in the days and weeks after. They didn't respond to me about it again. The Attorney General's office told me they declined a comment due to the age of the cases. That civil case ended in a mistrial, and when Dunlap went to refile, the statute of limitations had expired just 1 month earlier. Dunlap's freedom didn't last, though. He was convicted a second time in 1993 for Bolles' murder. Karen felt their defense attorney started closing arguments too quickly and didn't do a thorough job of defending her dad. She still wonders if the defense attorney was receiving threats at that time.
I said, how can you close this? I go, seriously, you haven't even convinced me. You presented no evidence that we had talked about. We had a game plan. He just shut it that fast.
While Dunlap was convicted a second time and sentenced to life in prison, Robeson was also charged a second time, but acquitted by a jury. Max Dunlap died in a Tucson prison in 2009.
My whole family, we've never spoken up. We just don't talk because it was dangerous for us.
It wasn't until Karen read her father's letters from prison about his perception of what happened that she decided to go public defending his name.
I can't even tell you how much it means to me to try to get this story to the public, to my family's story, because it was the last promise I made to my dad before he died.
So if her father wasn't involved, who does she believe was behind the attack on Don Bolles?
I mean, I'll just say I think it was a Mafia hit, and that's all I know. That's all I'm gonna say.
Did your dad have any ties to the mob?
No, not one. And now the more this story has gone on, I've realized how riddled the Mafia was in Arizona. I had no idea.
She's certainly not alone in her theory. Many believe the Mafia was retaliating against Bolles for articles written about corruption that affected their business. In fact, the Don Bolles murder is featured in the Mob Museum in Las Vegas. I saw it myself and took a picture of the exhibit. This is what it says, quote, "Organized crime in Phoenix can be traced to gambling, drug, and alcohol operations run by the Chicago and New York mob families. Before the arrival of Gus Greenbaum from Chicago in 1928, Phoenix was a desert backwater from the point of view of organized crime. Despite several high-profile mob killings over the years, organized crime in Phoenix did not attract national attention until the bombing murder of newspaper reporter Don Bolles in 1976. While mortally wounded, Bolles whispered a few words, including Mafia. However, after much publicity, investigations by police and news media failed to find evidence tying the mob to his death. Unquote.
And we were in the media our whole lives growing up, and it was in a horrifying way. You know what I mean? It was terrible. So the last thing I want to do is be in the media again, but this time I'll do whatever it takes to get people to listen to our stories.
The day after I did my story on our newscast in Phoenix with Karen's side of the story, I got a message on Facebook from Don Bolles. She said the view that Max Dunlap was innocent was a horrible insult to her dad's memory. After talking back and forth, that's when she kindly agreed to also do an interview with me in response to Karen and the Dunlap family publicly claiming their father was framed for the crime.
I think that they're in denial. The prosecutors showed all the evidence. They had all the evidence to come, and they showed how she transferred money.
She said, I think that they're in denial. The prosecutor showed them all the evidence. They had all of the evidence, and they showed how he transferred money. Diane and Karen have something in common, though. They both lost their fathers to this crime. And from that perspective alone, Diane can understand where Karen is coming from.
I'm sorry she lost her dad too, but I do think she was guilty. I mean, that's my opinion.
She said, I'm sorry she lost her dad too, but I do think he was guilty. That's my opinion. They do agree on one thing, though. Diane also believes the Mafia was involved in her dad's death, but Diane believes they were working with Kemper Marley and believes Marley was involved and got off without ever facing any charges.
I was mad. I was very angry, but what can you do?
She said, I was mad. I was very angry. But what can you do? Even 46 years later, the case is still shrouded in theories and immense intrigue. There are journalists who reported on this case for years who believe Dunlap and Robeson were framed and that others were responsible. There are people who believe the justice system did what it needed to do and that the convictions for Dunlap speak for themselves. But at the end of the day, Arizonans lost a truly dedicated and passionate journalist to a heinous crime. And Don Bolles, she lost her dad. Don Bolles only knew Diane as a young 6-year-old girl, but I asked her now as an adult what she would want him to know. She spoke from the heart.
I would tell him I love him. I would thank him for everything. Thank him for all the hard work he done.
She said, I would tell him I love him. I would thank him for everything. Thank him for all the hard work he did. My focus of this episode was on the two daughters and their fathers, but this was just a small piece of a story that has so much tied to it. There's a lot out there online if you want to learn even more about the Don Bolles murder case and the fallout in the years that followed. True Crime Arizona, the podcast, is hosted by me, Brianna Whitney, and produced by Sergio Hernandez. It's a production of Arizona's Family, 3TV, CBS 5, and azfamily.com in Phoenix, Arizona.
This is True Crime Arizona, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.